Are you ready for spring break? Well, let's see how spring will break you. This world is a strange one. Back in my school days, any sort of day off from school was something I couldn't wait for. Spring break was the second best thing from summer break. It was a week off school without the worry of snow or being stuck inside all day every day. But as these stories are about to show you, whether you go on a spring break vacation or you stay home this year, you are never safe. Because when you get time off, so do the freaks and psychopaths out there. So let's hear these allegedly true stories and see how your spring break might go, or should I say, end. But first, have you had a creepy experience on Craigslist? Have you had a scary encounter thanks to Facebook? Well, I'd love to feature your story in a future video. Just send it over at darknessprevails.org. Thanks. Now, bring on the spring. Number 1. Spring Break Swimming Trip. Submitted by Orthello P. In 2015, during a spring break, a few friends and I went to the lake for a swimming/camping trip. We did this every year since I was 14, the age my parents apparently felt I would be fine with friends. They had always been lenient, maybe a bit too much. Because there I was at 16 years old, driving with my 17-year-old friend Benjamin and two 17-year-old junior girls who I'd never met before. Plus there were 3 cases of beer clacking together in the back seat. These were the ingredients for bad choices just waiting to happen. Anyway, the lake we were heading to was surrounded by woods, with hiking trails throughout, kinda like an overgrown labyrinth. We were going to camp at a clearing connected to the nearest trail that opened up to the lake shore. It was basically the only reasonable spot for a tent. By the time we had set up the tent and constructed a little fire pit, it was already dark. But it was still crazy hot out, so we got into our swimwear and hiked down to the lake. But I honestly wasn't expecting Benjamin and the girls to take off their clothes and skinny dip. I definitely wasn't doing that. I've always been a pretty quiet guy. Quiet was the way I liked it. I mean, I didn't even know these girls. I'm surprised I ever agreed to go this year. Anyway, swimming trunks still on, I got into the water, enjoying the refreshing temperature of the lake. All the while, Benjamin tried to tease me into skinny dipping too. I just laughed at him and rolled my eyes. I was not about to be a naked fool. The next thing I knew though, one of the girls, Andrea, was screaming her head off. It was so sudden and real that it sent chills over my whole body. "What the heck, Andrea?" her friend shouted. I believe her name was Becky. Andrea pointed, and we all looked toward where she was pointing, and there, standing on the bank, was a person. I was surprised. It was some man, but after a moment I could make out that he was wearing overalls. The guy had hair down to his shoulders and was wearing a baseball cap. He was standing behind some bushes, just staring at the girls. They quickly covered themselves up, swimming back to the shore, yelling profanities at this strange guy the whole time, who unblinkingly continued to stand in the same spot and stare at the nude girls. What a freak, I thought. "Get out of here!" I grabbed a rock and chunked it at the dude, hitting the tree next to him. Quiet or not, I was getting very bad vibes from this guy. Suddenly, the man finally made a sound. He just laughed. He bellowed out a laugh, then he brandished what appeared to be a rifle before walking into the dark woods. The 4 of us were dumbfounded, just looking at one another. We ended up calling it a day early and headed back to the campsite. Becky and Benjamin stayed up making out by the campfire, drinking beer after beer, while Andrea and I headed into our own separate tents. I fell asleep relatively quick. But something woke me up in the middle of the night. I could see the fire from outside my tent now, which was, at this point, just a pile of orange coals. I rubbed my eyes, trying to figure out exactly why I was awake, when all of a sudden, I heard someone rubbing on the nylon of the girl's tent next to ours. Then there were 2 pairs of footsteps, laughing. Finally, whoever it was just ran off into the woods. I got up, and I ran outside to see Ben running out of the girl's tent doing the same. "The heck was that?" he asked. "Probably the same jerk as before," I replied. "Sounds like he brought a friend this time." That wasn't the end of it that night, though. For the next few hours, someone was out in the woods, maybe 50 or 60 yards away. They were screaming and making these eerie animal calls like howls. None of us got back to sleep that night, and we all huddled together in the same tent. The next and last day we were out there, we were on our way back to the lake. On our way, standing in the middle of the trail, there were two men. We didn't recognize them, but it was hard not to notice the guns that they had thrown over their shoulders. They looked proud of it, and they looked at us with these weird smiles. They never said a word. I wanted to say something. I wanted to assume that those were the guys that were messing with us last night, but I couldn't be sure, and I didn't want to make a problem with a couple of rednecks with guns. I don't know why we didn't just turn back right then and just head home. God, I should have said something. Anyway, we continued on. We walked past those two guys, but as they didn't move from the middle of the road, we had to go around them. The next time I looked back on the trail, those two were gone. Good riddance, I thought. Before I knew it, we were in the water again. This time, though, all of us kept our clothes on, and we were much less playful than before. Not much talking took place. I guess that's to be expected due to the experience from the prior night. I remember thinking it was a shame that some random idiots could ruin our spring break. But the awkward silence was quickly shattered when we heard those gunshots. They were incredibly close, so close my ears were ringing. There was shot after shot coming from different directions each time. Better yet, whoever it was aiming at the water around us. God forbid they were actually aiming at us and just missing. The shots were so close to us, they could have hit us at any second. What was their problem? The girls were screaming. Ben was cussing in any and every direction. And I honestly didn't know what to do. I felt scared for my life for the first time. We ran out of that water, ran back to camp. We grabbed our clothes and left everything else. The only reason we didn't report this to the police was the fact that we were afraid we'd get in trouble about the underage drinking. I mean, after all, we did leave our beer trash down there. Even still, we should have. It would have been worth it. Just knowing there are people that stupid, that ignorant, carrying around guns and shooting at kids. It scares me. Who are they going to toy with next? Who might they kill when they aim a little too close? I don't know who those people were, or why they did that to us. But screw you, if you're out there somewhere now, listening. Number 2. Home Alone for Spring Break. Submitted by carrymedaniel. Last year, as a freshman in high school, I decided to take it easy. I would skip out on anything too exciting when spring break came around. My school life was just getting a bit more complicated, due to pressure from so-called friends concerning my sexuality that was honestly beginning to confuse me. I just didn't want to deal with other people at the time. So, when my friends invited me to a water park getaway, and when my parents asked if I wanted to join them visiting out-of-state family, I said no thanks. Thankfully, my parents were okay with me staying home alone for a few days. There was plenty of food in the cabinets to keep my teen appetite satiated. Before they left, my dad simply told me to do one thing, to keep the deadbolt on the front door tightly locked. Then they were off. That first night alone, I played a bit too much Titanfall, and I practically nested in a pile of Funyuns. It was maybe 11:30 at night, and thanks to a crap ton of cherry coke, I was not at all tired. I was ready for an all-night gaming session. A sudden bang at the window behind me literally made me jump up. My heart nearly pounded out of my chest. When I turned toward the window where the noise had come from, I could feel my heartbeat behind my eyes. That's how surprised I was. I stood there just motionless, wondering if that sound wasn't just a sugar-fueled hallucination. That is, until it came again, and of course I jumped once more. Who the heck was beating on my window? Maybe it was neighborhood kids or some random hoodlums. My heart was racing. We've never had anything like this happen to our home before. For the next 20 minutes, I swear to God, I just stood there staring at the curtains covering the window. The banging never came again that night, though. I began to convince myself that maybe it was just a couple of suicidal birds. Once I gathered my courage, I walked over to the front door. It was only a few feet from that window, and I turned the lock on the doorknob as well as the deadbolt. I checked the window locks and the other doors as well. I was starting to get a bit paranoid. Then I went to bed. I admit it took me a few hours to fall asleep, but before I could, I had to get up and turn my bedroom lights back on. Being home alone makes everything a little bit more creepy. The next day, once I finally got out of bed and went downstairs, I was completely shocked to the scene before me. The front door was wide open, but I vividly remember locking it, double-checking it. I would have just chalked it up to me not shutting it all the way if it hadn't been for the banging from the night before. Thanks to that, the rest of the day was long and nerve-wracking, filled with paranoia. But after I ordered some pizza and talked on the phone with my out-of-town friends for a while, I nearly forgot about the previous night. Maybe I could salvage this spring break after all. 11:30 that night, as I was beginning to doze off on the couch, when the banging came again. This time, however, it jumped from window to window on the same side of the house. Apparently, someone was just running outside my home, hitting my windows back and forth. Instead of simply being scared, now I was pissed. I ran over to the window and looked behind the curtain. Outside, I could just barely make out a silhouette of a person. They were running between the next house and our own. I could have sworn I heard them laughing. I grabbed my cell phone and called the cops, all while checking all the locks in the house once more. I didn't care if it was just kids trying to prank me. I was tired of it. The last thing I felt was safe. When the cops arrived, I told them what was happening. They made sure I contacted my parents, who then informed me that they would be back tomorrow evening at the earliest. The police officers searched around the house, and then they patrolled the neighborhood for a few hours. Eventually, they came back and told me not to hesitate if something happened again, and that they'd send a patrol car by every so often to check in on things. Honestly, this made me feel safer. These guys did far more than I expected them to. From the stories I've heard, it seems like cops just take a report, look under a rock, and then leave. I guess I was wrong. Even still, though, it wasn't enough. Before going to bed, I literally barricaded my bedroom door, just in case. I slid my dresser in front of it and everything. In the morning, I woke up to my door, cracked open, and the front door was wide open again. Without a shadow of a doubt, someone was in my home while I was sleeping. I was crying at that point. I couldn't stay in that house any longer. I waited outside, called every friend and family member I could, trying to see if anyone was close enough to give me a ride to their place. Luckily, my parents got home much sooner than I expected. The moment I saw them, I hugged them both, regretting not going with them. Anything would have been better than enduring these past couple of days. They both questioned me about the goings-on that past couple of nights, and when I told them everything, my dad looked shocked. His skin turned white. Then he began to scold me for not locking the deadbolt. But I did, and I told him that. He took me over to the front door. We walked inside and he shut the door. Then he locked the deadbolt, turning it 90 degrees further than I ever knew it could turn. He told me that this was the way the deadbolt locked, that I may not have known better since we've only recently had to start using it, because the doorknob lock had broken. But I didn't know that. No one told me that. My parents had never told me how to appropriately lock the freaking door. Because of that, I could have been kidnapped or murdered. Ever since this experience, I haven't felt safe in my own home. I sleep with the lights on, and I wake up to the faintest noise. I have nightmares and panic attacks when it comes to being alone at night. This experience has twisted and broken something in my head, and I don't think things will ever be the same. Number 3. My best friend might be possessed. Submitted by Abigale. So this story takes place about 2 years ago, during a spring break. Me and my best friend Nikki went to our parents' condo in Florida for spring break. It probably wasn't the safest thing to begin with, considering we were two 18-year-old pretty girls hundreds of miles away from home, all by ourselves. But being that age, being young, you consider yourself invincible. Our first night, we just got settled in, and we just got used to the place, so nothing unusual had happened yet. The next night, though, we went to the resort hot tub at around 11, and we met some people our age and invited them over for a small party. A bad idea. Anyway, the party goes on with the usual college student debauchery, and I decide I'm ready to go to bed. I was exhausted. I ended up leaving Nikki to get everyone out. Well, at around 6 a.m., I wake up to find her standing over my bed, just staring at me. And it was more the kind of staring that was watching you sleep, rather than trying to wake you up. I started saying her name, trying to wake her or jar her out of whatever trance she was in, but it didn't work. It wasn't until after what felt like hours that she finally turned and slowly walked out of my room across the hall to hers. She never said a word. After I fell back asleep and woke up to daylight, I walked outside and assessed the damage, only to find the Ouija board that I had brought as a joke laid out on the coffee table, and everyone else was gone. When Nikki finally woke up, she had no recollection whatsoever of the events from last night, aside from one thing. Some boys found the board and insisted they play with it. I never saw those boys again, even though they were supposedly there for the whole week. I never woke up to Nikki watching me either, but I did begin to lock my door because the next morning it was open, even though I was sure that I had closed it the night before. Number 4. Chased. Submitted by Draiman. It was the start of spring break, and I was 14 years old. I'm 17 now. I was walking home from a friend's house on the way to my house during the night at 10 o'clock. I really had to hurry home or my parents would be all over me for coming home late. After all, my mom did tell me to be back by 9, but I was a bit of a lazy boy. I was walking down a road with streetlights that separated the town I live in and the dirt field at night. My friend, Alex, lived 5 minutes out of town, and I lived on the west side of the town. Walking on the road, I saw a man. He was walking all melancholy and in circles looking at the stars. It was a very weird sight, to be honest. Now, I didn't want to be bothered, so I moved far to my left away from that man on the road. But suddenly he stopped, body facing toward me, and I stopped as well. He was beginning to move a little bit closer to me. I asked him, "What are you doing?" That's when he cocked his face from the stars down to me, and it was the most haunting thing I've ever seen in my life. He had no eyes, as if they were poked out, and he was making a big smile. What teeth he had left seemed to be covered in stains that looked like old blood. He was breathing heavily out of his mouth between his teeth. I froze in terror, petrified, thinking I should run or scream at the very least. Whatever this thing or person was, it walked off away from me. Shivers ran down my spine, and I just tried to walk, keeping my eyes on that thing as I did. I couldn't get that dang face out of my head. When he was plenty far away enough, I turned around and focused on my walking. I sped up. I wanted to get home as soon as possible. A few minutes later, I heard the telltale sign of running footsteps coming from behind me, coming towards me. I turned around, and behind me that man was sprinting. He was coming right at me. My heart dropped, and I ran away from him, yelling for someone to help, but the man was still chasing after me. Heart racing from exhaustion and fear, I saw my neighborhood, and I ran into the street to find my home. In the corner of my eye, I saw that that man was right on my heel. I don't think I've ever run so fast in my life. I ran to the front door, but it was locked, and I did not have time to wait for one of my parents to open the door for me. Still screaming, I ran around to the backyard, jumping the fence. As I looked back at the man now jumping the fence as well, I fell right in the pool. And sure enough, that freak just jumped in after me. Who the heck was this guy? At this point, if I ran toward the back door, if it was locked, I would be cornered. I know it sounds like a stupid idea, but I jumped the fence again, away from my house. Over the fence, there is a dry canal that separates our neighborhood from another. I ran to the gate from the canal, and I tried to jump over it, but my foot got caught, and I landed on my face, breaking my nose. Tears welled up in my eyes and dripped down my face, and blood did the same from my nose. Not too long after, that man came over the fence as well. Now I was on the ground and I could barely see anything, but I picked myself up and I ran forward across a nearby street. Once I was on the other side, I looked back, and that man was now where I had been laying. But before he could run over at me, a moving truck passed by and screeched to a halt. Apparently, the driver saw me with blood all over my face, and he was a decent human being, so he got out of his vehicle and asked if I was okay. I was panicking and mumbling, trying to tell the guy about this strange man that was chasing me. I pulled the driver around his truck, where that man should have been waiting. But he was gone now. Thankfully, it was over. I was taken to a hospital where I had my nose fixed up. When I had to tell my parents about what happened, I didn't want to sound crazy about this man's bizarre face, so I just told them that some psycho was chasing me. Luckily, they believed me. The rest of spring break, I stayed home, and I definitely didn't leave the house. Even still, 3 years later, the thought of that psychopath out there gives me nightmares. And number 5, nearly killed by a shark. Submitted by ROT3. Now, my story might not be about some menacing serial killer or some strange evil beast trying to eat me, but it was the first time I've ever come face to face with death. The first time I've ever thought that I might actually die. I was visiting some friends in California during spring break. We were avid beachgoers. Sometimes we surfed, sometimes we just soaked up the sun. We would always find any excuse to be out in or at least near the ocean water. My friends and I had this spot near some shallow cliffs and a very rocky shore that we would visit to enjoy some private surfing. I was pretty sure the place was private property, but we didn't really care too much about that. The waves were just too great to pass up for surfing, but the rocks made it a bit risky. Again, we're the type that take risks, no matter how stupid they might be. Well, I was paddling out on my board, trying to avoid the rigid and painful-looking rocks. But as I was focusing too much on those rocks, a wave in front of me had built up to a dangerous size. And before I knew it, before I even saw it, the wave had swept over me. It took my breath away, and I was several feet below the water in seconds, with my board nowhere to be seen. I opened my eyes and it stung, and all I could think about were the sharp rocks I needed to dodge. Thankfully, though, I didn't hit anything. But something had a hold of me. I wasn't floating back up, no matter how much I pushed and kicked. And a few seconds later, I felt a deep, sharp, stinging sensation in my left calf. I looked down, and I saw these beady eyes staring back at me. It was a blue shark, and it had its mouth around my leg. I made the mistake of screaming underwater. Whatever breath I had left was gone as this shark tugged and yanked at my flesh. I almost passed out then and there just from the shock alone. I was panicking in the water. I wanted to yank my leg from it, but I knew that would make the damage worse, and it would probably make the shark bite harder, and I did not want that. I was just lucky the thing hadn't started to chew me. My heart was pounding out of my chest, and I could tell I was crying, despite being underwater. Suddenly, I remembered the things I've heard about and read about to do during a shark attack. Punch or kick it in the nose. So I did, with my other leg, and I beat the crap out of the creature's face. And after several desperate kicks, the thing let go. It was perfect timing. I felt weak, as if I was about to pass out from a lack of air or shock or both. Everything happened so fast. I swam back up and I made my way to shore as fast as possible, afraid that the shark might come back for me. So I didn't bother to kick either of my legs. At first, my friends were laughing at me from the shore, seeing me bail from that wave. But once they saw the look on my face, their expressions changed. Back on shore, they called an ambulance, but first they had to drag me back to the nearest main road, so that none of us got in trouble for trespassing. I didn't really care. I was too nervous about losing my life or my leg. That moment was the closest I've ever come to dying, and the fear I felt was so real and palpable. The fear itself became pain, if that makes any sense. So be careful out there. Shark attacks don't happen often, but you might just end up being that one in a million. I hope you all stay safe and enjoy your upcoming spring break. Everyone needs some R&R every once in a while, but keep your eyes open and beware of any new friends you might make, of any animals that might cross your path. During spring break, every sort of freak comes out of the woodwork to prey upon unsuspecting teenagers and people more focused on having a good time. So if you don't want to end up with a knife in your throat or teeth tearing into your flesh, you'd better watch your back. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And don't forget to send us your Craigslist and Facebook horror stories soon at darknessprevails.org. Thanks.